Welcome to Vices and Volumes, the podcast that brings forgotten stories from the 1800s back to life. I'm Avril, and each episode I dive into old books, manuscripts, and journals to uncover the fascinating tales, beliefs, and characteristics that shaped our past. From gothic ghost stories to social customs, from scientific curiosities to supernatural folklore. If it's tucked away in these pages of history, I'm going to find it and I'm going to share it with you. This episode came about in the most unexpected way. A fox's midnight raid on my hen house led me to an 1847 issue of the London Journal, and from there into the eerie world of the Irish Banshee. What started as a simple search for something to read to make me sleepy turned into a journey through the centuries of supernatural folklore, family curses, and death omens that span across Europe. So settle in as we explore the spectral woman whose wail has haunted Irish families for generations. It was mid-September. A calm, cool night, clear skies, everything lit by moonlight. The house was warm. I had left a window open a crack just to let in some fresh air. It's quiet where I live at night, and all you can hear is wildlife and livestock settling in. And just before 3 a.m, there was a horrid, loud scream that broke through the silence. My heart was racing, and I was on my feet before I even properly woken up. I knew straight away it was the fox, and my hens were in danger. The fox was right outside my window, screaming into the night. I ran to the kitchen door. Willoughby was already awake, whining to get out to defend his territory. I opened the door and we were both face to face with this large, beautiful red fox. The fox saw Willoughby and bolted. I held onto his collar for just a moment to give the fox a chance and prevent any unnecessary injury. Willoughby's collie greyhound mix had him right at the fox's heels despite a head start. But thankfully the fox slipped through the field gate and he was gone. Willoughby was left behind, giving one long woof, basically saying, "And don't come back." I was wide awake now. The adrenaline, the cold night had me completely alert. I checked on the chickens. Everyone was fine. They were completely unaware of what had happened. So I figured some tea and reading might restore my sleepiness before sunrise. I picked up one of my recent finds, the London Journal from 1847. I'd been in Galway the week before at Charlie Byrne's bookshop, and Vinny helped me track down 3 of these old, worn volumes that had once been part of a much larger set. The pages are in good condition, and volume 6 is decent, but volumes 5 and 16 have definitely seen better days. I ran my finger down the contents, and in the dim light, I saw a feature called A Few Chapters on Astrology and Magic. It was part of a series of the occult and mythology that ran on for months. After my night encounter with the fox, I was excited to see a chapter on the Banshee. I needed to know more, and excitement took over, and the sun started to rise. I was reading through Marion McGarry's Irish Customs and Rituals, which gave me a good background on the Banshee, and what struck me is how consistent the folklore and descriptions have stayed from the 1700s right through to today. Just like my midnight experience of the fox, sudden screams or wailing sounds could have been mistaken for something supernatural. It seems plausible, but it misses something important. Irish country folk knew the environment inside out. They could easily tell the difference between familiar animal sounds and something genuinely otherworldly. When they said they heard the Banshee's wail, they knew exactly what they were describing, and it was nothing like anything in the natural world. The name Banshee is an anglicised spelling of the Gaelic name, which means fairy woman. She was also the Ban Caint, the keening woman or crying woman, which connects her to the Irish mourning traditions. Women who served as professional keeners in life might have continued their sorrowful duty after death, transforming into banshees to herald the passing of others. I found this mentioned in the Chamber's Edinburgh Journal, April 27, 1878, where the author tells us of an Irish country funeral. What a contrast there is between a quiet interment in an English country parish attended only by the household of the departed, and well-remembered scenes of the churchyard of Kilkeedy, County Limerick. Here in the day gone by, a funeral was a picturesque and touching sight. There was something very weird and solemn in the sound of keening as it came, mournful and wild upon the ear, rising and falling with the windings of the road along which the vast procession moved. In the centre was the coffin, borne on the shoulders of relatives and friends and found in the next of kin. Outside the churchyard gate there was a large open space. There was a halt. The coffin was laid reverently on the ground, the immediate relatives of the dead kneeling round it. And now, on bended knees, all in that vast assemblage sink down. Every head is bowed in prayer, the men devoutly uncovered. Every lip moves. The wail of the keeners is hushed. You could hear a pin drop amongst the silent crowd. It is a solemn and impressive pause. After a few minutes, the bearers again take up their burden and carry into the churchyard, where, after being 3 times borne around the church, it is committed to its final resting place. The Banshee serves as a spectral messenger of death, announcing the impending loss through her distinctive otherworldly wail, described as an extraordinarily loud and siren-like. Importantly, the dying person never hears the warning. Instead, it reaches the family members, serving as both preparation and comfort. Traditional belief holds that the Banshee's attention is reserved for certain Irish families, particularly those bearing the ancient prefixes of O, Mac, or Muck. However, numerous accounts of these exist of families without these traditional markers experiencing Banshee visitations, including Lady Jane Wilde and Charlotte Thornley Stoker, mothers of Oscar Wilde and Bram Stoker respectively. This brings me to the McCarthy family story. It is only briefly mentioned in the Banshee article of the London Journal by referencing the poem seen in Fairy Legends and Traditions of the South of Ireland, written by Thomas Crofton Croker in 1838. He opens with these beautiful lines taken from Aurons by John Sullivan Limerick. Who sits upon the hearth forlorn, with robes so free and tresses torn, anon she pours a howling strain, and then she sits all mute again. Now peals the wild funeral cry, and now it sinks into a sigh. Of course, I wasn't contented to just skip over the story, so I dug deeper and found the original from Croker's Fairy Legends and Traditions of the South of Ireland. This story tells us of the McCarthy family, descendants of a once powerful Irish nobility who possessed a small estate in County Tipperary, and as an old Catholic family, they had their hereditary Banshee. In 1749, Charles McCarthy inherited the family estate at 21. He was handsome, wealthy, and typically drinking heavily and living recklessly. At 24, after a week of extreme debauchery, he fell gravely ill with fever and appeared to die. While seemingly dead, Charles claimed he appeared before God's judgment seat and was found wanting. But his guardian saint interceded. He was granted 3 years to repent and reform his life before facing final judgment. Charles recovered and completely changed his ways, becoming religious, temperate, while maintaining his good nature. As his 27th birthday approached, exactly 3 years after his vision, friends convinced him to host a large celebration, dismissing the prophecy as nonsense. During the preparations for this, his nephew, James Ryan, a ward of Jane Osborne, a deranged woman who Ryan had seduced and abandoned, attempted to shoot Ryan, but accidentally wounded Charles in the leg. Though initially deemed minor, the wound was poorly treated and became fatal. Miss McCarthy found herself facing the very scenario her son had predicted 3 years earlier. In her distress, she wrote urgently to her dear friend Miss Barry, who lived 50 miles away in County Cork, pleading for her to come and provide comfort and support. Miss Barry immediately recognised the gravity of the situation, and despite a challenging 2-day journey over poor roads, she and her 2 youngest daughters set out as quickly as they could arrange. Their plan was straightforward: travel by jaunting car to the home of their friend Mr. Burke for the first night and then continue on to Spring House the following day. However, delays meant they started the second day's travel much later than intended. As darkness fell and miles still to go, Miss Barry made the sensible decision to divert to the home of Mr. Burke's brother, who lived just off their route. They would stay there and arrive at Spring House fresh in the morning. The Banshee had other plans. She would ensure that the Barry family witnessed exactly what they were meant to see, directing them through the supernatural intervention to arrive at Spring House that very night. And Miss Barry's account of what happened, written in a letter from Sunday evening, the 20th of October, 1752. This account I'm going to read in full because it is both terrifying and exciting. The day had been windy and showery, and the sky looked fitful, gloomy and uncertain. The moon was full and at times shone clear and bright. At others it was wholly concealed behind thick, black and rugged masses of clouds that rolled rapidly along, and were at every moment becoming larger and collecting together as if gathering strength for a coming storm. The wind, which blew in our faces, whistled bleakly along the low hedges of the narrow road, on which we proceeded with difficulty from the number of deep sloughs on which afforded not the least shelter. No plantation being within some miles of us, my mother therefore asked Leary, who drove the jaunting car, how far we were from Mr. Burke's. "'Tis about 10 spades from this to the cross, and we have then only to turn to the left of the avenue, mum." "Very well, Leary, turn up to Mr. Burke's as soon as you reach the crossroads." My mother had scarcely spoken these words when a shriek that made us thrill as if our very hearts were pierced by it burst from the hedge to the right of our way. If it resembled anything earthly, it seemed to cry of a female, struck by a sudden mortal blow and giving out her life on one long deep pang of expiring agony. "Heaven defend us!" exclaimed my mother. "Go you over the hedge, Leary, and save that woman if she's not yet dead, while we run back to the hut we just passed and alarm the village near it." "Woman," said Leary, beating the horse violently, while his voice trembled, "that's no woman. The sooner we get on, ma'am, the better." And he continued his efforts to quicken the horse's pace. We saw nothing. The moon was hid. It was quite dark, and we had been for some time expecting a heavy fall of rain. But just as Leary had spoken, and succeeded in making the horse trot briskly forward, we distinctly heard a loud clapping of hands, followed by a succession of screams that seemed to denote the last excess of despair and anguish, and to issue from a person running forward inside the hedge to keep pace with our progress. Still we saw nothing until, when we were within 10 yards of the place where the avenue branched off to Mr. Burke's to the left and the road suddenly to Spring House on the right, the moon started suddenly from behind the clouds and enabled us to see, as plainly as I see on this paper, the figure of a tall, thin woman with uncovered head and long hair floated round by her shoulders, attired in something which seemed either a loose white cloak or a sheet thrown hastily about her. She stood on the corner hedge, where the road on which we were met that leads to Spring House, with her face towards us, and her left hand pointing to the place, and her right arm waving rapidly and violently as if to draw us on in that direction. The horse had stopped, apparently frightened at the sudden presence of this figure, which stood in the same manner as I've described, still uttering the same piercing cries for about half a minute. It then leaped upon the road, disappeared from our view for one instant, and the next was seen standing upon a high wall a little way up the avenue, on which the purpose of going, still pointing towards the road of Spring House, but in an attitude of defiance and command, as if prepared to oppose our passage up the avenue. The figure was now quite silent, and its garments, which had before flown loosely in the wind, were closely wrapped around it. "Go on, Leary, to Spring House, in God's name," said my mother. "Whatever world it belongs to, we'll provoke it no longer. 'Tis the Banshee, ma'am," said Leary. "And I would not, for what my life is worth, go anywhere this blessed night but to Spring House. But I am afraid there is something bad going forward, or she would not send us there." So saying, he drove us forward, and we turned on the road to the right. The moon suddenly withdrew its light, and we saw the apparition no more, but we heard plainly a prolonged clapping of hands, gradually dying away as if it issued from a person rapidly repeating. We proceeded as quickly as the badness of the roads and fatigue of the poor animal that drew us would allow, and we arrived here at about 11 o'clock last night. By the time Mrs. Barry and her daughters arrived at Spring House, they were met with sorrow and keening cries of Miss McCarthy. Charles died before the sunset on his 27th birthday, exactly as foretold in the vision 3 years earlier. The Banshee was both the harbinger and the guide, appearing to ensure the family witnessed Charles's prophesied death. So now I finally turn to the London Journal from October 16, 1847. This article is a collection of accounts, stories explaining and entertaining the reader on the legend of the Banshee. To illustrate and give example of the superstition, the journal tells us an anecdote of the Reverend Charles Bunworth, who was a beloved rector of Bunavent, County Cork, in the mid-18th century. He was renowned for his piety, learning and benevolence, respected by rich and poor alike, regardless of their religious differences. While his life was full of kindness and harboured great memories for some, the journal points out to us that it was his death that gained the greatest notoriety. The circumstances attending the death of Mr. Bunworth may be doubted by some, but there are still living credible witnesses who declare their authenticity, and who can be produced to attest most, if not all, the following particulars. About a week previous to his dissolution, in the early evening, a noise was heard at the hall door, resembling the shearing of a sheep, but at the time no particular attention was paid to it. It was nearly 11 o'clock the same night, when Kavanaugh, the herdsman, returned from Mallow, whither he'd been sent in the afternoon for some medicine, and was observed by Mrs. Bunworth, to whom he delivered the parcel, to be much agitated. At this time, it must be observed, her father was by no means considered in danger. "What is the matter, Kavanagh?" asked Miss Bunworth, but the poor fellow, with a bewildered look, only uttered, "The master, miss. He's going from us." And overcome with grief, he burst into a flood of tears. Miss Bunworth, who was a woman of strong nerve, inquired if anything he had learned in Mallow induced him to suppose that her father was worse. "No, miss," Kavanagh said. "It was not in Mallow." "Kavanagh," said Mrs. Bunworth, with that stateliness of manner for which she is said to have been remarkable, "I fear you have been drinking, which, I must say, I did not expect at such a time as the present. When it was your duty to have kept yourself sober, I thought you might have been trusted. What should we have done if you'd broken the medicine bottle or lost it? For the doctor said it was the greatest consequence that your master should take the medicine tonight. But I will speak to you in the morning, when you are in a fitter state to understand what I say." Kavanagh looked up with stupidity of aspect that did not serve to remove the impression of his being drunk, and his eyes appeared heavy and dull after the flood of tears, but his voice was not that of an intoxicated person. "Miss," he said, "as I hope to receive mercy hereafter, neither bit nor sup has passed my lips since I left this house. But the master—" "Speak softly," said Mrs. Bunworth. "He sleeps, and he's going on as well as we could expect." "Praise be to God for that, in any way," replied Kavanagh. "But oh, miss, he's going from us. Surely we'll lose him, the master. We'll lose him, we'll lose him." And he wrung his hands together. "What is it you mean, Kavanagh?" asked Miss Bunworth. "Is it mean?" said Kavanagh. "The Banshee has come from him, miss. 'Tis not I alone who've heard her." "'Tis an idle superstition," said Mrs. Bunworth. "Maybe so," replied Kavanagh, as the words idle superstition only sounded upon his ear without reaching his mind. "Maybe so," he continued. "But as I came through the glen at Ballybeg, she was along with me keening and screeching and clapping her hands by my side every step of the way, with her long white hair flowing about her shoulders. And I could hear her repeat the master's name every now and then, as plain as I ever heard it. And when I came to the old abbey, she parted from me there and turned into the pigeon field next to the barren ground. And folding her cloak about her, she sat down under the tree that was struck by lightning, and began keening so bitterly that it went through one's heart to hear it." The story continues with Bunworth gradually declining until the night before his death. Both daughters had retired exhausted, leaving an elderly relative to watch over him. As he lay sleeping in the parlour by the window, the watchers heard some moaning and clapping of hands outside, as if a woman in deep grief. When sceptical gentlemen investigated, they found no footprints in the freshly dug earth beneath the rose tree by the window, despite the sounds continuing throughout their search. This tale presents the Banshee as both herald and mourner, appearing to faithful servants and manifesting at the deathbed of his beloved clergyman, fulfilling her traditional role as harbinger of death for respected Irish families. The London Journal now takes us on a journey of a much wider European belief in supernatural heralds of death beyond the Irish Banshee. These spectral warnings appeared across different cultures, each adapted to the local customs and landscapes, yet sharing the common thread of aristocratic families being attended by otherworldly guardians. Lady Fanshaw's manuscript records the chilling encounter that demonstrates how these traditions crossed into Anglo-Irish society. Sir Richard Fanshaw and his wife were guests at an Irish baronial castle, surrounded by its protective moat, when the lady was awakened at midnight by a ghostly and fearful screaming. Through her window, illuminated by pale moonlight, she witnessed a female spectre hovering outside, her light auburn hair dishevelled over her shoulders. The apparition vanished, and after uttering two distinct shrieks, leaving Lady Fanshaw mute in astonishment. When she related this terrifying experience to her host the following morning, he showed no surprise at the supernatural visitation. His matter-of-fact response revealed the tragic history behind the family's attending spirit. "Indeed, I expected this. This was the prophetic phantom of our house, the spectre of a lady wedded to an ancestor and drowned by him in the moat from false notions of dignity because she was not of noble blood. Since this, the phantom appears before every death near my relations, and one of these died last night in my castle." This account illustrates how supernatural tradition served not only as a death omen, but also as a form of eternal justice. The wronged woman returning to announce each family death, her own murder becoming the source of a prophetic power. Scotland developed its own variations of these family spirits, and Sir Walter Scott documented how several Highland families anciently laid claim to the distinction of an attendant spirit who performed the office of the Irish Banshee, though with expanded duties. The Scottish supernatural guardians took on additional protective roles, as the Scot explained. The functions of these attendant genius, whose form and appearance differed in different cases, were not limited to announcing the dissolution of those whose days were numbered. The Highlanders contrived to enact from them other points of service, sometimes as warding off dangers of battle, at others in guarding and protecting the infant heir through the dangers of childhood, and sometimes as condescending to interfere in the sports of the chieftain, and point out the fittest move to be made at chess or the best card to be played at any other game. The MacLean family from Lochbury possessed one of the most dramatic examples of phantom chief, who galloped along the sea beach near the castle before family deaths. This spectral horseman appeared with recent memory, and the Scot noted that when the phantom rode round and uttered his death cries, the family and clan, though shocked, were in no way surprised to hear the next accounts of the gallant chief was dead in Lisbon, where he served under Lord Wellington. Wales contributed to its own death herald. The hag or the dribble, this creature would arrive after dusk, flapping her leathern wings against the window while calling the name of the doomed person in a broken, howling tone. Her cry was distinctive and terrifying, stretching out the victim's name in an otherworldly wail. The tradition extends far beyond the British Isles. European folklore was rich with similar supernatural heralds. The German territories told of the mourning woman who stalked the Lüneburger heath during stormy nights. The figure presented perhaps the most terrifying incarnation of the death omen tradition. On stormy nights when the moon shines faintly through the fleeting clouds, she stalks of gigantic stature, with death-like aspect and black hollow eyes, wrapped in grave clothes which float in the wind, and stretches her immense arm over the solitary hut, uttering lamentable cries in tempestuous darkness, beneath the roof over which one of the inmates must die in the course of 1 month. From France came the fairy Meleuse, who foretold deaths of noble families in Poitou, while the Troil had its own window-catching spirit. Even England had its versions, the White Lady of Brandenburg and the White Bird that served the Oxenham family of Devon as their supernatural's herald. These diverse traditions reveal how deeply embedded the belief in supernatural death and omens was across the European culture. When appearing as the Keening woman, the phantom horseman, the giant hags, or the spectral birds, these entities served the same fundamental purpose: bridging the gap between the living and the dead, providing both warning and comfort to families facing loss. The commonality of such beliefs suggests they fulfilled a deep psychological need, offering meaning and continuity in the face of mortality's ultimate misery. What strikes me most about these Banshee accounts isn't just their supernatural elements, but how they reveal a deep human need to find meaning in loss. Whether it's Charles McCarthy's prophetic vision, or Kavanagh's terrifying encounter on the road from Mallow, or Lady Fanshaw's midnight visitors, these stories served as a vital function to their communities. They provide both warning and comfort, bridging the gap between the living and the dead, while maintaining connections to ancestral traditions. The consistency of these accounts across centuries, from the 1700s right through to the modern folklore, suggests that something profound about how we process grief and mortality. The Banshee wasn't just a harbinger of death, she was a guardian of memory, ensuring that no one passed unnoticed, and that every family death was witnessed and mourned. And perhaps that's why these stories have endured in an age before modern communication, before we could instantly know of distant tragedies. The Banshee served as a supernatural telegraph system, connecting families across time and space. Irish emigrants hearing their wail in foreign lands, knowing that somewhere back at home their family was facing loss. There's something both terrifying but deeply comforting about that connection. Thank you for joining me on this spectral visitation from Irish folklore. I hope to record a separate Bear Recital episode featuring some of the original accounts I quoted, so you can experience these chilling tales in their full glory. Until next time, may your own midnight encounters be limited to wayward foxes rather than wailing banshees. I'm Avril, and this has been Vices and Volumes. Thank you for listening.